And I'm back under the 2001 Monte Carlo SS. I had got a request to do a video on the oil pan gasket since it always leaks. Under the 3800s, one thing you'll notice is that the passenger side motor mount bracket blocks the oil pan access. So first things first is getting the engine supported properly mainly on the passenger side. That way you can take this bracket off right here. This bracket right here runs across and mounts from the front to the back of the engine. So you would have to remove these two screws right here and right here, and then remove the top screws, one here and one here. You would then lift the engine up slowly, remove this engine mount out of the way, and then you would be able to come back here and remove the bolts that's holding this right here. The front ones are easy to get to because they're right here and here, but the back one is a little tricky. You have to get them from in front of the transmission, which is very tricky. But once you remove this bracket right here, your oil pan is clear to do whatever you need to do to it. So these bolts right here are the oil pan bolts. You also have the cover right here. This cover needs to be removed. Once you remove all of these bolts around the oil pan, as well as disconnect the oil level sensor, and come down behind here and remove and loosen these bolts as well, you then have the option to drop the oil pan down slowly. But there's a trick to replacing the gasket in the oil pan. Most people don't know it, but the oil pan itself is a hard gasket oil pan, which means it doesn't require any silicone. With that being said, it also requires that you remove the oil pickup nozzle. That has to be removed in order to replace the oil pan gasket. The oil pan gasket is very complex. It's not just a gasket that goes around the oil pan. It also sits inside the oil pan, such as shape as a bowl. So that's the complexity of it. If I had a picture of it, I would have showed it to you, but I don't have the old one. But the gasket goes around the oil pan, but inside the oil pan itself is also an oval shape or a slope that goes down and comes back up, which joins the other side of the oil pan. That's just the way GM designed it, and you can't take that off without removing the oil pickup pump's nozzle. These bolts look like they're 10 millimeters. Well, really they're, I believe, 11 millimeters, and it does require some, expertise in gripping these bolts and removing them slowly without stripping the heads. Same way as tightening back up, it's the same process. You want to be able to have a firm grip on the head of the bolts as you're torquing them on. That's basically it. For the oil pan itself, it has one corner here, and on this side has one corner here, as well as one corner here and here, which requires silicone because there's a gap in between the crankshaft casing cover, which is aluminum, and also the rear main seal cover, which is aluminum. There's a small gap, which is from this point, that point, and this point of the oil pan itself, which requires just a little bit of RTV silicone. Do not overuse the silicone because then you should start to fail. But once you put silicone in those four corners, you sit the oil pan gasket on top of the oil pan, and you place it back up securely. You put in the first 4 bolts for each corner. You tighten them up by hand, and then you install the remaining bolts. And what you do is you tighten the bolts in a pattern which is from here to here to here to here and here and here and here and here until you repeatedly do it until all of them are tight, and then you can torque them down. I'm not sure what the torque specification was. I think it was 13 foot-pound of torque. I did it by hand and just torqued it to my hand strength, basically. I didn't want to overdo it, and I did not have the proper torque gun in the first place to do it with anyway, so I just went by my hands and how I felt, the tightness and firmness of the bolts. But again, you would have to remove the passenger side motor mount and the motor mount bracket in order to get full access of the oil pan. The biggest problem is this bracket right here, but when you do take it off, which then again you will need support from the engine. The engine will have to be lifted on the passenger side. It would have to be lifted just a little bit, a few inches up. That way you can have a clearance to drop the oil pan. As you drop the oil pan, you can take the oil pan down, and you'll be left with the oil pan gasket wrapped around the oil pickup tube. Now, the oil pickup tube has its own gasket, which comes with the oil pan gasket. You would have to remove the oil pickup tube anyway to let the gasket come down, because the gasket is wrapped around the oil pickup tube. So you would disconnect the oil pickup tube with 2 bolts. It has 2 bolts. You would bring it down with the oil pan gasket. You would take the new oil pan gasket, put the oil pickup tube through the oil pan gasket, and screw the oil pickup tube back onto the engine housing. It's housing on the engine. And you would then bring the oil pan and firmly line it up with the oil pan gasket. Before you put on the new oil pan gasket, there's 4 corners. Again, there's 4 corners. The rear main seal plate cover housing and the crankshaft plate cover housing, they have 4 gaps, 4 little gaps, which require some RTV silicone. So then again, you got to put silicone, just enough of your pinky that you could smudge on there on both corners, all 4 corners, to effectively help out contact with the oil pan. Do not overuse silicone. Silicone is not required on this oil pan gasket. Only on those 4 corners right there that I recommend that you use it. That way it doesn't leak. And it's reverse process as you did taking them off. Is reverse process with installation. You just put the oil pickup with the oil pan gasket. You match the oil pan gasket up with the oil pan. You put in the first 4 bolts each corner. You hand tighten. You hand tighten the rest of the bolts all the way around, and then you start a pattern, which can be here, 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 and then you start from here, 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 here. That you will tighten them all up until each and every one is tightened, and then you will put your torque specification to use. That's basically it for installing the oil pan. Don't forget, you need RTV, just 4 little dabs of it. And the oil pan gasket does come with the oil pickup tube gasket also, because you have to remove the oil pickup tube to replace the gasket.